During his trip, President Joe Biden said that U.S. intelligence appeared to absolve Israel from blame in last night's Gaza hospital explosion.
Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy.
Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He previously served as a U.S. State Department official working on Middle East policy and the Arab-Israel peace process. Aaron David Miller, thanks for joining us today.
David, pleasure to be here.
U.S. President Joe Biden said today that based on the information he's seen, whatever happened at the hospital in Gaza was the result of an errant rocket attack from a terrorist group in Gaza, in his words, though he concedes that not everyone in the Arab world is going to believe that explanation. How pivotal is this incident in this moment, in your view?
Well, I think you've seen from the unrest and anger and violent demonstrations in Arab capitals and in the West Bank, just how volatile the situation is. You know, the frame the president's trying to create is a frame that focuses primarily on Israel. He, unfortunately, because of this incident, and he's made it clear, probably briefed from his own intel sources, and I'm sure the Israelis as well, that this was an errant Palestine Islamic Jihad rocket attack, not an Israeli missile strike. But that has, unfortunately, led to the cancellation, or at least the suspension, maybe the postponement of the quote-unquote Arab summit that he was supposed to have in Amman. So the optic right now for the president, at least in the Arab world, is not the best. It's not the one that the president and the administration intended, and it wasn't their fault. But I think it suggests just how frustrated and angry the region is, and how much they want the president to sort of equate the terror surge on October 7, which was literally drawn out of an Islamic State or Al-Qaeda handbook, with the blockade and punishing airstrikes that has led to the death of well over 2,000, almost 3,000 Palestinians. I think they want moral equivalence here. And the president clearly doesn't see it quite that way, even while he expresses, and he did in Israel, his profound sadness over the loss of innocent Palestinian lives.
The purpose of this trip, there's multiple objectives here for the president, each of them complex. Obviously to show support for Israel, but also to stop this from widening into a more regional conflict. So how damaging do you think this event was in terms of that prospect of de-escalation and containment?
I mean, I don't think it will detract over time from the two objectives he set on this trip, or the two objectives that the administration has defined with respect to the region. One is clearly trying to figure out a way to convince the Israelis and the Egyptians, since they are the primary parties responsible for the Rafah crossing, which is the only crossing right now that is open from southern Gaza to Egypt, to try to create a stable sort of bridge or corridor for the surging of humanitarian assistance, which is waiting in order to proceed in Gaza, but is being upheld. Hamas is the third party that has a say in Rafah, and they have no interest whatsoever in facilitating the flow of Palestinians out or allowing humanitarian assistance in. So that's one objective. The second, of course, is deterrence. The United States will soon have 2 carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I think the president said, we listened to the speech, warned, if you're thinking about intervening, in a specific reference to Iran and its associated non-state actor group in Lebanon, Hezbollah, he said 3 times, if you're thinking about intervening, don't. I think the show of American force reinforces, I think, the inclination on the part of both Tehran and Hezbollah not to get involved in a major campaign, which would be very costly for both of them. So I think on balance, given how fraught the situation was and how uncertain it is, the president more or less got done what he set out to do. One more point, which is to sit with the Israelis. He said it publicly, to sort of remind them of the importance in the wake of our 9/11 in not not being consumed by rage and planning a very clear strategy going forward where the means at your disposal are somehow suited and appropriate to the ends you want to achieve. An operation against Hamas in Gaza right now is going to be bloody and fraught. And then there's the day after problem. So I think this was, on balance, it's a very successful trip by the president.
So just on that final point you made, that he reaffirmed his support for Israel, but also cautioned them, as you say, not to let rage over October 7th, what happened there, to guide all of their actions in response, and pointing to mistakes, he says, that the United States made in its response to what happened on September 11th. How do you think that's going to be interpreted by Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet and by the Israeli people?
You know, I think the blood is up in Israel. 1,300 Israelis killed in a matter of hours. The bloodiest day with respect to the deaths of Jews since the Nazi Holocaust. I think it reinforces, frankly, a sort of inherent, despite the anger and the rage, an inherent risk aversion. I think the delay in this operation, we're already in week 2. And I would suspect we'll get through another week without a major ground campaign. Weather is a problem. Israelis want to create pressure to get more Palestinians from Gaza City to move south so they can operate more freely and avoid civilian casualties. And of course, the president's visit. I think that whether or not the Israelis go through with this, I think that they're thinking about what the president said very seriously. For years, despite the politicians in Israel's right-wing politicians in Israel's propensity to want to do this, finally eradicate Hamas, I think security and intelligence elite military is very wary of undertaking this operation. Because
of the civilian toll inside Gaza, the possibility of provoking Hezbollah, is it all of those things that are weighing on them, sir? Yeah, primarily, though, their own casualties. Right. Obviously, and then the incredibly difficult challenge of what comes next. So do the Israelis reoccupy Gaza, 2.3 million people, 21,000 humans per square mile, half of whom are under the age of 15? Who provides the social services? Who cleans up the garbage? Who administers? Who pays the salaries for Gaza's bureaucracy? You take Hamas out, you create a new reality, you undermine its capacity to govern and its sovereignty, and clearly Gaza is not benefiting from Hamas's governance since 2007. But who then picks up all of these tasks? And the answer right now, nobody knows. Just as a final point before we let you go, President Biden did announce that Israel has agreed, apparently, to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, subject to inspections, because they have concerns that, crates of food and sacks of rice could be used to bring in ammunition and resupply for Hamas. Egypt has made that a condition before it'll even consider allowing foreign nationals to come out of there. But you mentioned that Hamas has no interest in allowing people to leave. I think that's pretty easy to understand. But you also said they have no incentive to allow aid to come in. Why would you think that is the case? If you could explain that to me, and what do you think the prospects are that we see some sort of humanitarian relief coming out of all of this? I mean, I think it feeds the notion somehow that Hamas is completely inadequate and incapable of governing. They have sufficient fuel stocks and water. They are clearly not sharing those with the population of Gaza because they're redirected and repurposed toward sustaining their military campaign. So I think it's a fraught situation in Rafah. I mean, days. We can't even get the 400 American passport holders out through Rafah. I hope the president has succeeded in breaking the logjam. I would have felt better had he been able to go to Amman and see Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, to have a one-on-one conversation with him about Egypt's role there. Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I want to thank you for your time today.
David, thanks for having me.